What if we told you God's most powerful vessels weren't the polished, perfect, or publicly praised? What if the ones chosen to carry divine fire were, in fact, the most broken, the most rejected, the ones who walked through hell so many times they memorized the way back? The Bible doesn't always spotlight the ones sitting on thrones of gold. Sometimes it points to the ones crawling through caves, wrestling with demons, and living in obscurity. These are God's darkest chosen ones. And if you're listening to this right now, feeling like you've been hidden, misunderstood, discarded, or even damned, maybe you're not cursed, maybe you're being called. The first time I realized that God chooses from the shadows, it flipped everything for me. We've been trained to look for holiness in robes, in pulpits, in sanitized smiles. But God always seemed to move differently. He chose Moses, a murderer in exile, talking to bushes in the desert. He chose David, a forgotten shepherd boy, the last in line, overlooked by his own father. He chose Paul, once a persecutor of Christians, so feared that even after his conversion, the early church didn't trust him. God's pattern is consistent. He doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. But only after they've been shattered. Why is that? Why does God seem to call from the pit, not the palace? Because only those who've been broken can carry unbreakable grace. Only those who've wrestled with darkness can hold the kind of light that pierces through it. And that's one of the first hidden truths the Bible reveals. God hides his most powerful ones in the hardest places. Not to punish them, but to shape them, to strip away ego, to burn off everything that isn't real, to prepare them for a mission that cannot be accomplished without fire-tested faith. If you've ever asked, why me? Why this battle? Why this pain? You're standing in the oldest conversation between God and his chosen. You're standing in the wilderness where the real ones are made. Not in the spotlight, but in silence. Not in applause, but in agony. Have you noticed that some of the most spiritually potent people you've ever met are The second hidden truth is this. God often uses rejection as redirection. If you've been cast out, disowned, betrayed, misunderstood good, that means you're being moved out of alignment with people and systems that were too small to carry your assignment. Look at Joseph. Sold by his brothers, falsely accused, imprisoned, and yet every rejection moved him a step closer to the throne where God would use him to save nations. What looked like betrayal was actually divine choreography. Could it be that every closed door in your life was actually God's way of rerouting you to a bigger destiny? But here's the thing. When you're one of God's darkest chosen ones, you don't get to walk the easy path. You don't get to blend in. You are called to carry something heavy. And often, that means being misunderstood even by those closest to you. That's the third hidden truth. God's chosen often walk alone before they walk in purpose. Isolation isn't punishment. It's preparation. Before Jesus ever walked into ministry, he was led, not by accident, but by the Spirit into the wilderness. Alone. Tempted. Tested. Why? Because before the world can hear your voice, you have to know who you really are without their approval. That kind of solitude breaks you open. It confronts you with every lie you've believed, every identity you've worn that wasn't yours, every wound you buried. And when you pass through that fire, something radical happens. You stop performing. You stop pretending. You stop needing to be understood. You become dangerous to the darkness because you no longer need validation to obey God. And that leads us to the fourth truth. God's darkest chosen ones are dangerous because they've died before they died. They've already lost it all. They've been through hell and came back. So threats don't move them. Rejection doesn't shake them. Pain doesn't paralyze them. Because they've already faced the worst and found that God was still there. Still speaking, still choosing them. That kind of knowing is unshakable. That's the kind of person God can trust with power, because they won't use it to build ego. They'll use it to liberate others. Let me ask you something deep, and don't answer too fast. What if the pain you've been hiding from is the very portal to your power? What if the thing you thought disqualified you is the very proof that you're qualified. What if the darkness you walked through wasn't a detour but divine training? Because the fifth truth is this: God's chosen are often forged in contradiction. Look at the life of Jacob. His name meant deceiver, and yet he was chosen to birth a nation. He wrestled with God, literally, and walked away limping. But that limp became his legacy. That limp was proof of his encounter. We want to be used by God without being wounded. But the wound is the mark. The wound is the evidence that you've been touched by something holy. It's not weakness, it's the very thing that makes your voice carry weight. So here's the real question. Are you willing to be wounded for your calling? Are you willing to be misunderstood, to be broken open, to be exiled from comfort, in order to carry something divine? Because that's what it takes. That's the price. And that's why God doesn't choose many. He chooses the ones who've died to the need to be liked, the ones who've walked through hell and still kept their hearts soft, the ones who've been buried and still chose to rise. This is just the beginning. These truths aren't meant to inspire you. They're meant to initiate you, to crack you open, to wake up the part of you that always knew you weren't meant to live a normal life. You were meant to disturb the system, to carry something sacred, to be a living contradiction, wounded and wise, broken and burning with holy fire. Now ask yourself, if God is still choosing people like that, could He be choosing you?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
There is a fire that doesn't burn skin but burns illusions. A sacred fire that doesn't destroy you, it destroys who you thought you had to be. And this fire, this invisible furnace, is the hidden language God uses to speak to His most dangerous chosen ones. Not with soft whispers or comfort, but with intensity, with disruption, with pain. Because when God marks someone for something holy, He doesn't send angels with trumpets. He sends affliction. He sends the kind of pain that makes you question if you're cursed. But here's the mystery. If you're being burned, you might just be being branded. You might be one of His chosen rebels, the ones who don't fit the mold, who don't follow the rules, who don't look holy but carry something sacred anyway. Have you ever noticed that the people God uses most powerfully are always the ones who've suffered deeply? It's not coincidental, it's spiritual law. The oil flows from the crushed olive. The glory comes after the grave. The resurrection only follows a death. And most people want the crown without the cross. But God's chosen rebels, the ones marked by fire, they understand this. Pain is the initiation, not the punishment. When you stop numbing it, when you sit in it long enough to hear its voice, it reveals things about you that pleasure never could. It reveals the truth. I had to learn this the hard way. I used to think pain was a sign I was off track, that if I was really walking in purpose, everything should feel aligned, easy, light. But then I read the Bible again, and I realized every single person God used was broken first. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his own brothers. Elijah begged to die under a tree. Jeremiah was mocked and imprisoned. And Jesus, the very Son of God, was betrayed, beaten, and crucified. So I had to ask myself, if pain was part of their process, why did I think I'd be spared from the fire? The reason pain is the secret language of God's chosen rebels is because rebels don't learn from comfort. They learn from chaos. They are too wild, too unconventional, too deeply wired for transformation to be trained by tradition. They have to be undone. And fire is the only thing strong enough to do that. Because fire doesn't just hurt, it purifies. It doesn't just destroy, it reveals. When you go through fire, everything that isn't you burns away. The masks, the roles, the false identities. What's left is raw, real, holy. Ask yourself something most people never dare to ask. What parts of me need to burn so that what's divine in me can finally rise? That's not a comfortable question. That's a dangerous one, because once you ask it, you can't go back to pretending. You can't go back to playing small. You start to see that the fire isn't your enemy. It's your forge. And if you let it do its work, it will make you into something unbreakable. This is what separates the chosen from the crowd. Most people run from pain. They sedate it, avoid it, blame others for it. But the chosen ones, they sit in it. They let it undo them. They let it teach them. They let it show them what no sermon ever could. And in that fire, they receive their assignment. Not through applause, not through validation, but through the voice of God that only speaks in the silence after everything else has burned. We always talk about finding purpose, but purpose doesn't show up in a nice package at your front door. It emerges from what nearly destroyed you. It reveals itself in the ashes of what you thought you needed. And the thing is, once you've been burned by God in this way, you don't fear the fire anymore. You carry it. You become it. You become the one who walks into dark rooms and lights them up without saying a word. The one whose presence disrupts the fake. The one whose eyes carry both trauma and transcendence. But here's the paradox. The more fire you carry, the lonelier the road becomes. That's why pain is not just the language, it's the filter. Not everyone can walk with the chosen. Not everyone can handle the heat that comes off your life. Because when you've been marked by fire, you don't just shine, you expose. And the people still hiding in shadows won't always like that. You'll trigger them. You'll scare them. You'll remind them of the calling they ignored. But that's not your burden. Your job is not to be understood. Your job is to be obedient. So if you're in the fire right now, don't pray to escape it too quickly. Ask what it's trying to burn off you. Ask what it's trying to awaken in you. Because only those who survive the fire can carry it. Only those who've been undone can be trusted to rebuild. And only those who've been marked by pain can speak the language of power. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. The fire is not the end. It's the beginning of your emergence. Watch what rises when the ashes settle. There's a strange, almost offensive pattern in the Bible that keeps repeating itself, and most of us miss it because we're trained to look for glory in the obvious. But God's ways are not our ways. While we chase platforms, He builds altars in caves. While we seek crowns, He hands out crosses. The truth is unsettling, yet it holds the key to understanding who God truly chooses and why. God hides His strongest warriors in the weakest places. And He does it not to shame them, but to shape them. Not to punish them, but to protect the power they're being prepared to carry. If you feel like your life doesn't match your calling, if you've heard the whisper of something great in your soul, but your circumstances look like a contradiction, you're not lost. You're hidden. And that's not a mistake. That's a divine strategy. God hides His chosen ones like seeds, buried, covered, forgotten by people, but not by Him. Because greatness doesn't grow in the spotlight. It grows in the soil of obscurity, in places where no one is watching, where your only teacher is silence and your only comfort is God. Think about it. When God called Gideon, he was hiding in a winepress, afraid and unsure. When God called David, he was tending sheep, left out of the selection process entirely. When God called Esther, she was a nobody in a foreign land. And when He called Moses, he was in exile, stripped of his identity, running from his past. Over and over, God chooses the outcast, the overlooked, the underestimated. Why? Because only those who've been crushed by life can carry the weight of heavenly authority without misusing it. Only those who've been humbled can handle the glory without turning it into ego. Let me ask you a deep question. What if the place you're trying to escape is the very place God is using to equip you? What if your obscurity is not a prison but a womb? What if the silence you hate is the space where your real voice is being born? We live in a world addicted to visibility, but God is addicted to intimacy. He doesn't need you to be seen by the world before you're sealed by Him. And that sealing happens in private, in pain, in places that feel like failure but are actually forming the foundation of your anointing. You think you're stuck, but you're being sanctified. You think you've been forgotten, but you're being forged. Because here's what the divine outcasts know. When God hides you, it's not because you're not ready. it's because the world isn't ready. You carry something disruptive, something that will shake atmospheres, something that will confront systems, awaken sleepers, and expose fakes. And that kind of power must be prepared in hiddenness, or it will destroy you and everyone around you. Don't despise your hidden seasons. Don't curse the silence. That's where roots grow. That's where depth is formed. That's where identity is stripped from titles and cemented in truth. When no one is clapping, when no one is watching, when no one is validating your worth, that's when the real you is being born. And when the time is right, you won't have to force your emergence. God Himself will announce you, just like He did with Jesus' 30 years of silence, then a single sentence. This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased. No resume, no followers, just divine approval. So if you feel like an outcast, good. That means you're being prepared outside the system so you won't be bound by it later. That means you're not being contaminated by the politics of performance. That means your oil will be pure. Your fire will be real. Your message will carry weight. Because it wasn't rehearsed in front of people, it was forged in front of God. And when you finally walk into your assignment, you'll do it with a quiet authority. The kind that doesn't need to shout to shift atmospheres. The kind that speaks and demons tremble not because of volume, but because of vibration. Because your voice will carry the frequency of someone who's been with God in secret. Someone who's bled in silence. Someone who's been buried and still chose to believe. But here's the final truth for this part. The outcasts are not just hidden, they are holy, set apart, sanctified by suffering. Not because they are better, but because they are willing to go where others won't. They are willing to say yes when it costs everything. They are willing to be invisible until God says, now. So I'll ask you this. Can you trust God in the shadows? Can you stay faithful when no one sees you? No one praises you? No one affirms you? Because if you can keep showing up, keep staying open, keep walking in obedience, then when your moment comes, you won't just arrive, you'll emerge. And you won't come out bitter, you'll come out blazing, with a light the darkness can't explain and a truth that religion can't tame. You are not forgotten. You are being formed. Hidden, yes, but only because what you carry is too sacred to be exposed too soon. We live in a world obsessed with visibility, applause, and tangible success. Everything around us screams, be seen, be known, be celebrated. But the darkest chosen ones, the ones God handpicks in silence, are given a different assignment. Their mission isn't built on vanity metrics or public validation. Their mission is rooted in the unseen. Their lives are not driven by what can be counted, but by what cannot be measured. This is the immortal assignment, to live for a kingdom that cannot be seen, to build with materials the world doesn't value, and to walk in obedience even when no one understands. You and I were not sent here to impress. We were sent here to impact, and impact often looks like invisibility at first. It looks like planting seeds you may never see bloom. It looks like building altars in places where no one else would bother to kneel. And while everyone else is chasing platforms, you're called to carry presence. Presence that shifts rooms. Presence that breaks chains. Presence that doesn't come from charisma, but from communion with the unseen. That's why God's darkest chosen ones often live lives that don't make sense to the average person. They say no to things that look good. They walk away from opportunities that others would sell their soul to have. They're not motivated by quick wins, fast fame, or temporary status. They've seen too much. They've tasted eternity. And once you've touched something that transcends time, you can't go back to living for likes. You can't go back to chasing shadows when you've been branded by substance. And yet, this calling is not glamorous. It's lonely. It's costly. It will break your heart in all the right ways. Because part of the immortal assignment is letting go of your need to be understood. You'll carry messages that make people uncomfortable. You'll walk in directions no one else is walking. You'll feel like an alien in a world that celebrates noise while you're learning to listen to whispers. But you weren't made to blend in. You were made to burn. Quietly, consistently, eternally. This is what Paul meant when he said, "We fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." That's not just a poetic verse. That's a survival strategy. Because if you only live for what you can see, you'll quit when things don't look right. But if you live for what is eternal, you'll endure the process. You'll embrace the stretching, the silence, the setbacks, because you know that every hidden act of obedience echoes in eternity. Let me ask you a question that most people avoid. Are you willing to live a life that makes no sense on earth but is celebrated in heaven? Are you willing to carry out an assignment that may never get you a trophy, a title, or a platform, but will shake the foundations of hell? Because that's the kind of life the darkest chosen ones are called to. Their reward isn't here. Their joy isn't tied to outcomes. Their validation comes from the one who sees in secret. And that's the final hidden truth. The immortal assignment is not about doing more, it's about becoming more. Becoming someone the world can't corrupt. Becoming the kind of vessel heaven can trust. Becoming so aligned with God's voice that even if the whole world goes left, you'll go right, because obedience is your compass, not popularity. When you live this way, you start to see everything differently. Delays become divine protection. Rejection becomes redirection. Silence becomes sacred. And success? It's not defined by applause but by alignment. You stop asking, "Is this working?" and start asking, "Is this faithful?" Because you know that God's scoreboard looks nothing like man's. And when your assignment is immortal, you don't need to rush. You just need to remain. So here we are, at the end of a journey that in truth is only just beginning. You've been called, not because you were the most qualified, but because you were the most willing. Willing to be broken. Willing to be hidden. Willing to be set apart. Willing to carry fire in a world that only understands smoke. You are part of a lineage of rebels and prophets, warriors and misfits, lovers of God who lived for a kingdom that couldn't be seen. And now it's your turn. What will you do with the fire inside you? Will you dim it to fit in, or will you let it consume you until all that's left is truth? Because if you're one of God's darkest chosen ones, you weren't meant to survive this world. You were meant to change it. Now go, and don't look back.